Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar about cooking street food in Australia. My name is Charles, and I get the privilege of being your host for today. I hope you are all doing well, that you've had a great week so far, and are having a really good day today. For those of you who are here with us live, I would like to kindly ask you to make sure that our connection is good today by please saying something in our chat. So if you can see me all right, you can hear my voice and the presentation, please just let me know by saying something in the chat box. You can go ahead, say hi, hello, maybe yes, I can hear you, or even let me know how your day is going so far today. So far, it seems like our connection is good. That's awesome. I'm glad. That's great. So I would just like to remind you all, of course, if we do have any connection problems through today's webinar, just let me know as well in the chat. So if there's ever a time, maybe you have trouble hearing me or seeing me, just let me know. And of course, I'll do my best to establish a good connection. If it isn't the best today, my apologies. We have a big storm, a big rainstorm in my city right now. So it might affect the connection, but I'm hoping it won't. It should be all right. So I see that we have a bunch of people here today. Wow, there is a lot of people. Awesome to see you all. I won't be able to go over all of your names because, there is a lot of you here, but it's just awesome to see everyone. I see that we have a bunch of familiar people that I have seen in the past. So for those of you who already know me, well, it's great to see you again, and I am excited to be learning with you again today. For those of you who don't know me yet, well, let me just introduce myself. As you know already, my name is Charles. I am one of the Tutlo tutors here on the platform, and I am one of the webinar hosts here as well on the platform. And beyond that, to get to know me a little bit better, I currently live here in the Philippines, and why I mentioned we have quite a big rainstorm at the moment because the Philippines is a tropical country. So we get some hot weather and a lot of rainy weather as well. But on a personal level, I love coffee. I am a coffee fanatic. I also do really enjoy books. I love to read, and I love sports and exercise as well. So if we share any of those common interests, that's absolutely awesome. Maybe let me know as well in the chat. So over the next couple minutes, I'm just going to quickly explain. Someone said in the chat, I hope the Philippines is okay. Yes, it's okay. Rainstorms are normal here. It's not like it's anything bad. It's just rainstorms are normal because, again, tropical weather. But yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Like I said, over the next couple minutes, I'm just going to quickly go over what we will do today. And that will give you time where if you need to grab a snack or a drink, go ahead and do so, as you might have maybe 1 or 2 minutes before we get into any too serious material. So let me just, of course, explain simply what exactly are we doing today so that you know what to expect. And of course, you want to know that you're not wasting your time today, right? So let me go ahead and just explain what we're doing. So obviously, from the title of our webinar, we're going to be talking about street food. Now, if you were here with us last week, we spent some time talking about street food, but instead of in Australia, we spent some time talking about street food in England. So we're going to be talking about street food specifically in Australia and how it was developed, how street food became a thing. And of course, we're going to do a little trip just like last week and talk about some street food from all over the world in order to see how different street food is in Australia. That's one of the beautiful things about street food. Whether that is in your country or in a country on the other side of the world, it is quite different, obviously based off the culture. And street food has become one of the most popular things for tourists and for even people who live in their city, because again, it's affordable and it is something that is quite common no matter where you go. So we're going to spend some time, of course, learning vocabulary and things along those lines because we want to combine some real world learning and some English learning today. So I hope that explains clearly what we will be spending our time focusing on. And before we get into that, just two quick reminders. The first thing I would like to remind you of is how long we will be here. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar, we are here for around 30 minutes together. And we began today at around 7 p.m. So that means we will go ahead and finish as close to 7:30. We might finish a couple minutes early or a couple minutes over, but I will do my best to be respectful of your time and finish as close to 7:30 as I can. And as I go ahead and have our webinar progressing, our chat will be open. You can participate in some question activities we will have later on. Feel free to make comments about what we're learning and even go ahead and ask questions, as we will have a Q&A at the end of today's webinar. And I know somebody already asked a question, and I'll go ahead and answer that at the end, as I'll go ahead and go through those questions. All right, Dominic, no problem. Let's go ahead, dive into today's topic of street food, and especially in Australia. But first, let's just talk about street food in general. What exactly is it? Well, let's go ahead and discuss it. So street food, to understand it simply, is that it is ready to eat food or drink. So if you go ahead and you're trying to get street food, it is ready to eat food or drink. It's right there. It's for you. You go there, you give your money, you get your food and eat it, or you're able to get your food and leave. That's the beauty of street food. Like I mentioned, whether you're on one side of the world or the other side of the world, street food is fast to eat, and it is also quite inexpensive. That's a great thing about it as well. Whether you're the richest person or someone who's not as rich as the richest person in your country, street food is there for all types of people, tourist or citizen. Now, how exactly is street food different from fast food? Because when we have fast food, right, like your McDonald's, KFC, and things like that, that is also ready to eat food or drink. So what are the differences with our fast food and our street food? Now, let's go ahead and learn that. Well, simply, street food is simply sold by people who we call vendors. A vendor or vendors are people offering something for sale, and key part, typically in the street. That's where it comes into play on how street food is different from fast food, is because it's sold typically in the street. Your fast food is sold in your restaurants, like your McDonald's, your KFCs, and many other different fast food restaurants. Street food is typically sold in the streets, and it's sold by vendors. Now, vendors, again, they're just people offering something for sale. Not necessarily all vendors sell street food, because you can have vendors who sell clothes, you can have vendors who sell maybe fruits or vegetables, and many other things that are sold maybe in markets and places like that. But just keep in mind, vendors are people who sell things in the street, and therefore they do also count as selling street food. And there are other terms that you could use about the names or the titles of people who sell street food. Another one would be your merchants. When you have a merchant, that's simply a person involved in trade or sale. So you can say that merchants or vendors are the ones who sell street food. And again, they sell it in the street. So that is how it is quite different from fast food, because fast food is sold in your restaurants. While you might have a hamburger as some street food and a hamburger in a fast food restaurant, only difference is where it's sold. One sold in the street, one sold in the restaurants. Now, since we established who sells street food, let's talk about another way we can explore how street food is different from other ready-to-eat foods, and that could be where it's sold. So like I mentioned, street food is typically sold on the side of the street, but it could be also sold in markets, and specifically also places we call flea markets. Now, a flea market is a market that is specifically outdoors. So if we go ahead and go to a flea market, you might have many things for sale at flea markets, not just food. Flea markets also have people selling clothes, maybe people selling books, toys, maybe certain things you can do. It's just a certain kind of market. It's called a flea market because typically if you look at a market itself, that is what we think of a place you can buy fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. Now, a flea market is just a different kind of market. It's a market that specifically sells many different things, but it's also specifically outdoors. And street food is also sold at flea markets. And another place besides markets and the street food is also quite popularly sold at fairs. Now, a fair is just a gathering of amusements for public entertainment. So, for example, I don't think I have a picture right now, but a fair would be, a place where you have roller coasters, games, and many different things. Street food is also sold in those areas. So that's kind of how we learn and get to go ahead and understand what street food is. It's sold by vendors or merchants in the streets, but it's also sold at markets, flea markets, and fairs. But probably the most important thing when it comes down to street food is how it's sold or what is it using to sell its product. And the first thing that comes to mind is that street food is typically sold using what we call food carts. Now, a food cart is like the picture on our screen. It's just a small vehicle with wheels that is used to sell hot food. And again, remember, street food is ready to eat food or drink. So if a food cart is selling hot food, it means that it's ready to eat, right? Food that you don't have to wait a long time for in line. So you have street food sold using the iconic food carts, right? You see these in movies or even in real life. You're going to see them on the sides of the streets, maybe even the street corners near very busy areas of cities. But remember earlier, we talked about street food being sold in markets and fairs. In those specific places, typically maybe they don't use food carts. They use what's called a booth. A booth is a small structure at a fair or a market used to sell goods. And again, not necessarily all booths sell street food. A booth, because they sell goods at fairs and markets, can sell clothes. They can sell items like books or different kinds of toys, whatever it is. But at markets and fairs, you're not typically going to see many food carts. You're going to see more booths, like in the picture on our screen. Now, booths are also called stalls, and they're, again, in English, there's a lot of words that can mean the same thing. But for today, we're learning it as a booth, okay? A small structure, like in the photo, at fairs or markets that sells goods. And in our case, it sells our favorite kinds of street foods. So maybe let me know in our chat, what do you think are some Polish street foods? What are some famous street foods in Poland? So if someone was visiting a Polish market or fair and they were at the booth, or there was even a food cart on the corner of the street in Poland, what would be some street foods I would be able to go ahead and see there, or maybe you would see there or try? Because what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little trip around the world. We're going to go ahead and go over a few different famous kinds of street foods from all over the world, and then we'll compare it from the street food in Australia. Let's go ahead and see. I see there's a bunch of people saying things in the chat. Awesome, pierogis, zureks, many things. Awesome, okay. Let's go ahead. Let's actually see maybe what kind of street foods are all over the world. Our first trip, let's go ahead, let's go to Asia. So we're gonna talk about a thing called aloo chaat. And it's a very famous street food in Asia, typically sold in the Middle East and in India as well. And as you can see, it is a street food using potatoes and many other different things involved. Of course, there's different versions of the same thing, but this is one of the famous things sold in certain parts of Asia. Again, like I said, the Middle East or in India. Aloo sha'at. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. Now, we're going to take a trip to my country, the Philippines. What is a street food from the Philippines? Well, we have something called a banana Q. Now, banana Q is simply a banana that is cooked in sugar, as you can see on the photo, and then we put it on a stick, and then we eat it in that way. So you have the healthy banana and the unhealthy sugar put together. So if you ever visit the Philippines, you're going to see that this is one of our famous street foods called a banana Q. And personally, one of my favorite foods in the entire world. Very delicious. So we went to Asia. Now let's fly back to Europe. Let's go ahead and talk about a famous street food called gelato. Now, gelato is very similar to another street food called ice cream, but gelato is quite different as well. It has its own unique spin on it, many different flavors, many different textures. And personally, I love gelato. Again, I just love food, but gelato comes from Italy. Now, we're going to go from one part of Europe to the neighboring country of Greece, and we're going to talk about a gyro. And a gyro has a lot of similarities to another street food called a shawarma. And that's one of the things on how different cultures can affect each other. Greece is quite close to areas like Turkey and the Middle East, and they're all around the Mediterranean Sea. When you go to different countries, you're going to see that there are street foods that are similar to each other, but each country has its own unique spin on it, right? Like the gyro in Greece or the shawarma in the Middle East. And one interesting fact I found out while going over and preparing this webinar is we go to Belgium for our last one, and you have pommes frites, I believe that's how you pronounce it, from Belgium. And actually, fun fact is that fries were first invented in Belgium, not France. You know, you have French fries, as people in the States call it, or I guess crisps in England. That's the British and American English. But French fries, or pommes frites, I believe, or frite, I'm not too sure how it's pronounced, was first started in Belgium. And it's on the screen. They serve it in a cup, a plastic cup with many different sauces. And maybe you've had the privilege of going ahead and trying some of these street foods as you live in Poland, which is quite close to some of these countries like Italy, Greece, and Belgium. But let's go ahead now and travel to our main country for today, which is Australia. And you're going to notice that there is one thing that is very common in Australian street food. Let's go ahead, dive into our first Australian street food. You have what is called barbecued snags. A barbecued snags is basically, at the end of the day, a sausage that is dipped in garlic butter and then barbecued. It's basically a barbecued sausage with some unique flavors in it. One of the most unique things of street food in Australia. Someone said the fries in the photo. Yeah, maybe not the most appetizing fries. That's fair. That's fair. So again, back to barbecued snags. One of the probably most iconic things you're going to find in Australian street food. And another thing that has transferred from Australia to other parts of the world is what is called pigs in a blanket. Now, pigs in a blanket, you might not find in many different food carts sold in Australia, but you're going to find them a lot, especially even in other parts of the world, sold in places where there are, for example, fairs or markets and things like that. Now, a pig in a blanket is a sausage again, but it's wrapped in dough and then it is baked. So you have barbecued snags, which is sausage that is barbecued. And then you have pigs in a blanket, where it's sausage again, but it's wrapped in dough and baked. And then we have our third kind of sausage, or in this case, it's called a Dagwood dog. And it is a kind of street food of meat that on a stick that is deep fried. And it's either a hot dog or a sausage wrapped in some kind of pastry batter, and they deep fry it. So that's probably one thing you've seen so far in common with Australian street food. It involves a lot of meat. But it doesn't stop there, because another very popular Australian street food is meat pie. And yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a pie of meat. Now, that is a lot of meat in certain kinds of street foods, right? You have three versions of sausages: sausage that's barbecued, sausage that's baked, and deep fried sausage. And we have meat pie as well. And of course, we're not going to talk about the only street foods in Australia that revolve around meats and sausage. You also have something called a chico roll. Now, a chico roll is something that is quite similar to many different kinds of street foods in different parts of the world, because a chico roll is quite similar to a food we have here in the Philippines that looks quite like a chico roll, but a chico roll is basically a snack that is invented like a version of a spring roll, which is originally, I believe, a Chinese food. And you see, like I mentioned, a lot of the times countries pass different kinds of street foods from one country to another, but they all have different versions of it, right? You have, like I mentioned, the spring rolls in China, chico rolls in Australia, and I believe it's in America now as well. And you even have the lumpia Shanghai rolls here in the Philippines, which is basically all the same thing, just a different version because it's in a different country. Now, of course, because of our time today, we weren't able to talk about all of the different kinds of street foods in Australia, but I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of the street foods in that country. And of course, if you want to do some research, there are a lot of different things you can look up of famous street foods in Australia. But like I said, it involves a lot of meat, especially in Australia, and a lot of sausages. So what we'll do now is, of course, since I've been talking for the past 20 or so minutes, I want to give you all the opportunity to practice as well what we have been learning today. So up on your screen, we're going to do a little exercise. We see an incomplete sentence, and you have two options to make the sentence correct. You have letter A and letter B. So the sentence says, blank sell food at fairs. And we have two options. Letter A, merchants sell food at fairs. And letter B, merchandise sell foods at fairs. Which of these two is the proper answer? Let me know in the chat if you'd like to participate, practice it in your head. It will give you a chance to practice, of course, some of the vocabulary we went over earlier in our lesson. So let me know. Is it A, merchants sell food at fairs, or B, merchandise sell food at fairs? So I see we have a bunch of answers in the chat and a couple more incoming. If you went ahead with letter A, merchants, that is the correct answer. Because remember, merchants are the people who do the selling. Merchandise is what's sold by the merchants. So don't get those two confused, all right? Very similar words, merchant and merchandise. But merchants sell food at fairs. Now let's talk about the Australian street foods. Remember, we talked a lot about sausage and different kinds of meat. So can you tell me, which of these two are deep fried? We learned the cooking technique, right? Do we say that pigs in a blanket are deep fried, or Dagwood dogs are deep fried? So let me know. What do you think? What was the proper answer here? Is it A or is it B? Is it pigs in a blanket that get deep fried, or Dagwood dogs that get deep fried? All right, so I see a bunch of answers coming into our chat. All right, so awesome. We go through a letter B. That's the correct answer. Dagwood dogs are deep fried because remember, if we have the idea of the early one of the pigs in a blanket, that's baked. Dagwood dogs are deep fried. So I hope that was just a fun activity to refresh your memory on some of the things we learned. And of course, as our time is drawing to a close, we're going to go ahead and just give you a couple quick reminders of what we learned today. Remember, vocabulary learned about street food, lots of different things like merchants or vendors, what they're sold using, like booths or food carts. And of course, we talked about street food from all over the world. We go ahead and we have different kinds of street food, from banana Q in the Philippines to gyros in Greece, shawarmas in the Middle East. And of course, we talked about the kinds of street food in Australia. And remember, street food is one of those things that is such a long topic. You can spend so much time talking about it. But I hope that at least today, you were able to understand just some of the basics behind street foods in the countries we discussed. And of course, maybe it will inspire you to maybe go ahead and try some new street foods in the future. We're going to go ahead and transition quickly to a quick Q&A. And this is the time of today's webinar when we're going to go ahead and answer any questions you have. So if you have any questions at all about what we learned today, or just any questions in general, don't hesitate. Go ahead and ask. And of course, I'll do my best to answer your questions. I see we have a couple questions already. Somebody's asking, what time is it now in the Philippines? It is 1:28. So we have a 6-hour time difference from Poland and the Philippines. Someone asked, what kind of sports do you prefer the most? Basketball is probably my favorite. Basketball, baseball, and football. Those are like my 3 favorite sports. And then ice hockey is also up there as well. But as we wait for any other questions, there's currently a poll on your screen that just asks, did you find today's webinar useful? I would love to hear from you. Was this a useful topic for you? Did it benefit you? Did you learn something today? At the end of the day, I hope it was. That was my goal. I want to make sure, of course, we're spending time learning things. Like, of course, with a topic like today, we're not going to learn anything too in-depth about different vocabulary terms or grammar and things like that. But of course, I was hoping to be able to expose everyone to different kinds of things that probably aren't talked about as much. And we have one last poll question as we wait for any other questions in our chat. This poll just asks, would you like to join us again in another webinar like this in the future? If so, keep a lookout. We do webinars quite often. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to see each other again through another webinar in the future. Thank you guys for filling out that poll. I don't see any more questions. And our time is about up, so I do have to finish. But before we do, maybe you can check us out on social media. We post content on our Facebook, our LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel as well, where we post content on there to keep everyone up to date about anything happening, and even post some fun facts and some learning tips and some interesting videos. So check us out. I hope you would be able to enjoy us on social media. And that's going to be all from me. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a blast, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Until next time, have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again. Stay safe as always, and goodbye for now.